Good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Jen Donnell, and I am the founder of VP Circle. So excited that you are with us this evening as we participate in a very exciting panel discussion called Leading with Inclusion, the Imperative for Business Survival. In today's rapidly evolving business landscape, inclusion is no longer just a corporate initiative. It is a competitive advantage. This discussion will uncover why leading with inclusion is essential for sustainable growth, talent retention, and long-term profitability. Our panelists will share actionable insights on embedding DEI into business strategy, overcoming resistance, and measuring the real impact of inclusion on the bottom line. We will explore tonight how organizations can cultivate leadership pipelines, unlock the full potential of diverse talent, and future-proof their workplaces by making inclusion a business imperative. Tonight, we are joined by an exceptional group of thought leaders who have dedicated their careers to driving inclusion, equity, and strategic transformation in the workplace. Karla Hill is a seasoned HR executive and career coach. She brings 35 years of HR leadership experience and a true passion for economic empowerment, helping professionals to accelerate their careers through strategic HR tools. She is also the founder of GPS Career Strategies and formerly the Deputy Director of HR supporting the City of Philadelphia. And she is also our moderator for this evening. Welcome, Karla Hill. Michael Bach is an Amazon best-selling author and an idea thought leader on DEI. And he has spent 20 years advising top global brands, including AT&T, L'Oreal, and Best Buy, on embedding inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility into their corporate strategies. Jeremy York is the president of Invigorate HR and a co-author of The Joy-Powered Organization. Jeremy has shaped HR strategies for organizations like United Healthcare and Purdue University, fostering workplace cultures built on trust and respect. Dr. Kazike Prince, a DEI leader and chief equity officer, has driven transformation initiatives, securing multi-million-dollar funding to expand equity programs across corporate, nonprofit, and government sectors. He was formerly the head of DEI for National Instruments. And last but not least, we have Sabrina Williams. Sabrina Williams is a former chief people and culture leader for NESN. She is a trusted C-suite and culture leader and strategist. She has led large-scale organizational change across private equity, media, healthcare, tech, specializing in M&A integration, talent strategy, and DEIB leadership. Together, these experts tonight will explore how inclusive leadership fuels innovation, enhances business performance, and builds resilient organizations. So let's dive into this critical conversation and uncover how inclusive leadership can shape the future of work. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to our moderator this evening, Karla Hill. Take it away.
The great introduction. As you said, we're just going to dive in. We have an esteemed group of DE&I professionals just committed to that next level. So I'm going to start with Sabrina Williams. So Sabrina, I know that you spent years at NESN Sports. I'm a big sports fan, so Yankees versus the Boston area, but that's okay. Can you discuss the strategies and challenges faced in fostering that inclusive workplace at NESN while you were there?
Yeah, so thank you so much. I think, for us, the challenge was how do you have, I think, similar to a lot of companies, a workplace that reflects the audiences that you're trying to attract, right? And so when you think about sports, you have people playing on the field who are diverse, Hispanic, African American, et cetera. But then the people who either are on the broadcast may not be diverse, people behind the camera may not be diverse. And so really, I think we had a kind of coming to Jesus around how do we make sure that the content and the way we talk about sports really resonates with the people who are playing the sports, but then the communities that they come from. And so it was, I think, for us, a reckoning to a certain extent. It was also a realization that the target audience that we had initially, I think, been focused on, men, white males who were ages 55 plus, were a dying breed. Nothing against white men, but with, the statistics and baby boomers and sort of the other generations that are right behind, those generations are more diverse. Women make up 56% of the population. Minorities, people from non-white cultures make up the majority. And reality is, and by 2030, our audience was going to look very different. And so we really went through a journey of a couple things. One is recognizing that we couldn't do this alone and engaging the communities and the employees with what does it look like when you're trying to talk to a Hispanic audience, and how do you communicate the commitment to the community while still honoring the differences even in that community. And so we really brought people into the conversation. We looked at our employees that were diverse, asked them to sort of help us. And we then, I think, gave them actual things that they could help us with. Well, whether it was a marketing campaign, whether it was a logo, whether it's helping develop content, because I think if people feel that you're giving them an opportunity not only to be heard, but to have impact. And then we were able to back that up with data and ratings, and then be able to go to our advertisers to say, we have a competitive advantage here. And one area that's really boomed for us is women sports, and really feeling like we're on the cutting edge of what's now a billion-dollar business. But again, we really had to do, I think, some internal sort of reconciliation between who we thought our audience was and the reality of who our audience was going to be. And the fact that we needed our employee and our community really to reflect that more holistically.
That's great. So just curious, you mentioned the rating. So how, just in terms of, like we talked about the business imperative, how did that really reflect in terms of the ratings, and what other objective metrics did you use to say, hey, this is working and we're impacting the people we need to impact?
Yeah, I think it was getting really creative and really thinking outside of the box. So traditionally, when you're selling advertising, you're basing it on ratings. But what we had to really do is say, okay, are there other ways in which we can measure that people are actually paying attention? So for instance, ticket sales was something we never looked at as a measure of diversity. So who is buying our tickets? Number two, partnering with media outlets that are more organic to the community, like El Mundo is one in the Boston area. And what we learned from them is that we thought we were reaching the community
One more
by
time.
having Spanish language, uh, um, having the teleprompters with the language, as it's called SAP, and that was going to be, that's the product that was reaching the Hispanic community. We found out from our media partners that people who are Latin born, et cetera, really prefer things to be communicated in English because they're trying to learn English. Right? And so we were measuring something that really had no validity in the communities that we were trying to reach, right? And I think so once we shifted the paradigm and really started to understand where those communities were and how they received information, we were able to sort of expand and go to our advertiser and say, okay, yes, eyeballs are really important, but here's other ways in which we're going to measure the impact to the bottom line and the community.
That's great. Thank you so much. I mean, you also talked about, you touched on it a little bit in terms of women's sports. Women's sports is receiving increased attention and investment, which is significant progress towards representation and equity. Could you elaborate on what this shift means to you personally and the sports industry as a whole?
I think to me personally, as someone who grew up playing sports and the power of sports, first generation here. So when I think about sports, it was my mom Because my dad, when, he worked, and it was my mom who stayed home taking care of the kids, which was kind of her job. But she was the sports fan. She was the person who, watched the Yankees, go Yankees, because she played and really loved cricket. So for her, sports was a way for her to get acclimated. It was for her a way to sort of build a community when she was by herself, trying to figure out this American culture. And by extension, really, so I saw sports, it's not only a thing you played, but something that helped you understand sort of your place in the community and the world. And it gave her a sense of belonging and a sense of pride, and being able then to go out and get a job when she felt more comfortable. So to me, women's sports that's the audience we need to attract, right? They're the ones that are oftentimes at home, who are quote unquote behind the scenes, and who are making the buying decisions. They're the ones that go out and spend the dollars. And so it always felt very strange to me that sports really wasn't built for them. The commercials she would watch, there was never anything about women in those commercials. And so then fast forward, we had an opportunity in our business to really say, okay, how do we align our diversity efforts? And I and others said, well, we should really be thinking about how we could really market it to women. And surprisingly, people were like hesitant because they're like, it's 55 plus white men who watch TV. And so we brought focus groups in and really sort of debunked that myth. But then the other thing too is the men, we really started to speak to them, that many of them had women in their families, right? They had mothers, they had daughters, they had nieces. And so getting people to really understand that the impact is not just for me as a woman, but for the women that are in your communities, in your household. Don't you want them to have these opportunities? I think really was a breakthrough when we made it really universal.
That's great. And I mean, what I'm hearing is that there's untapped markets, right? And when you have diverse employees in your organization, they can help you take that money off the table to turn it into profitable dollars. So thank you so much. So next up, I'm going to go to Michael. Michael, I just love the diversity of the panel. Michael is the former founder and CEO of the Canadian Center for Diversity and Inclusion, also an Amazon bestseller, as Dr. Jen talked about. So can you discuss the insights on DE&I from your book and key lessons learned from founding the Canadian Center for Diversity and Inclusion, Michael?
Yeah, thank you. And I just have to say, I was loving what Sabrina was talking about. Look, because my approach to this work has always been about addressing a business problem. I don't come from an HR background. I actually come from an IT background, which I recognize makes absolutely no sense that I work in diversity, but it's a long story how I got there. And so when I started working in diversity, my my immediate reaction was, well, this is a business problem. Like what, looking at it from the perspective of our current talent, and our future talent, looking at it from the perspective of our clients. And in starting the Canadian Center for Diversity and Inclusion, which was an interesting learning experience. I don't know if anyone's ever started a national not-for-profit. A gift of wine is always welcome. It's an experience. I really felt there was a gap in the conversation, and I am Canadian. I do live in California now, but I am Canadian. And Canada is a ridiculously large country. And to put it in perspective, Canada is physically bigger than the United States, but the entire population of Canada is about the size of the population of California. So just to give you some perspective, we're very physically spread out, and there wasn't a central voice in the conversation. There was a lot of organizations trying to be the voice, but they were all kind of getting drowned out. There was a group for around sexuality and gender in the workplace, Pride at Work Canada. There was a group around disability. There was and groups around disability. And I just felt like it lacked a cohesive voice so that employers could come to one organization and say, help, I don't know what to do here. And so started the organization with that purpose to say to any employer of any size, come here, start here, and we will tell you where to go. We will give you the directions. Not to say that we did everything, far from it. But we became that kind of central nexus of the conversation. Lots of learning, but managed to survive a decade there, and it was a good experience.
Thank you. So your book provides insightful perspectives on diversity, equity, and inclusion. How have your viewpoints evolved since founding the Canadian Center for Diversity and Inclusion, and what key lessons have you learned throughout your journey?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know if you've heard, there's some stuff going on about DEI right now. And I'm not going to get political. I'm like the antithesis of political. Um, but I really thought we were further along. I thought we'd kind of addressed some of this. Not to say that we didn't need the business case anymore. I think we perpetually need the business case. But I didn't think we were going to get to the point where we were actually having a conversation about whether trans people had the right to exist. So I would say that I'm disappointed with what we have gone through. I feel like in the past few months we have made some significant steps backwards. In terms of how it's evolved, I would say I've even gone further to that need for the business case, the need for the data. Just keep focusing on the data, focus on the top line and the bottom line. And for organizations that are in the nonprofit world, public sector, academia, et cetera, just focus on it's still the top and bottom line, money in, money out. And we have so much data that proves that a focus on inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility, or DEI, or however you want to phrase it, is good for our businesses. It's good for our organizations, which ultimately becomes good for our society and good for our economy. Block out the noise, block out the screaming about political correctness and being woke and all that nonsense. It's just red herrings. It really is complete nonsense. This is not about special treatment. It's not about lowering our standards. It's about acknowledging that bias exists, that privilege exists, and that we are working towards a solution, trying to address a problem that we have in our businesses. Things like women make 76 cents on the dollar. That's not a historical number. That's a today number. Women work for free for 3 months of the year compared to a man doing the same job. And that's bad for the economy. I don't put on my social justice hat. I don't have one of those. It's bad for the economy because it means that woman doesn't have as much money, which means her family doesn't have as much money, which means she doesn't have as much disposable income, which means she's not paying as much tax, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's bad for the economy that women make 76 cents on the dollar, considering they are the majority of our workforce. So my thinking since writing Birds of All Feathers, now way back in 2020, which, apparently there's a pandemic that happened. My thinking has said just that we need to continue to double down on the focus on what's good for the bottom and top line of our organizations.
Thank you very much. I know last month there was a significant economic boycott that got some attention, and that can definitely affect employee morale. Could you expand on how businesses should address and mitigate such issues to maintain an inclusive and engaging workplace environment?
Yeah, so I think you mentioned the boycott, which I believe was brought together by Dr. Sharpton and a few others, which has seen organizations like Target and Amazon lose billions of dollars Whereas organizations like Costco, which have doubled down on their DEI efforts, have seen an increase in sales. So people are voting with their feet, and that is exactly what they should be doing. The reality is when people feel like they have to hide something about their identity, or they're experiencing bias and discrimination in the workplace, they are not going to be as engaged. They're not going to be as productive. They're not going to be as creative and innovative. You're going to have higher levels of turnover. You're going to have increased safety incidents. There's a ton of measures we can look at that show that when you don't focus on this area of inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility, your business will hurt. And it all comes down to two things: your people, who you hire, who you retain, who you promote, who you fire, and your customers. And people want to feel connected. I think we're seeing that now more than ever, that people really want to know that the places that they're spending their hard-earned money at, the Costco's, the Targets, et cetera, are aligned with their belief system. And I mean, Target's a perfect example. They turned their back on Black entrepreneurs, and they're hurting because of it. And we'll see an about face eventually. I think their stock price just has to drop it low enough, and that's a good thing, because that's how we can show people that this matters.
And that's to your point, the bottom line is the bottom line, right? In terms of
is.
money, that's what people are going to pay attention to.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Michael, so much for your feedback.
My
And
pleasure.
next, I'm going to go to Dr. Kazeke Prince. And in your former role as DE&I executive at National Instruments, it placed you at the forefront of implementing policies and strategies for an inclusive work environment. Could you give us some examples of successful strategies you've developed, as well as significant challenges encountered along the way?
Well, thank you. I appreciate the question. You know, as I was preparing for this, one of the first things I had to kind of recognize is that for a lot of companies, let's forget where we are today, where people are pulling back. Just a few years ago, after the murder of or lynching of George Floyd, yeah, a lot of companies had done really very little. They maybe had a few employee resource groups or something like that, but they didn't really have a strategy. They really have kind of a vision or anything that when it came to that. And some actually did a little bit more work than that. But the point is that as far as how do you move from the ideas to actually the operationalization of the work that you're focusing on? So you're actually doing something versus just saying all the good words that make people feel good about themselves. And so there was a number of things that I engaged in. One was having these inclusive conversations where they actually provided materials where they would have inclusive conversations with their teams across the entire organization. So basically, they gave information to the managers and said, here's a series of questions and topics we want you to talk about on a variety of topics, whether it be psychological safety, trust, race, other issues. And we just have an array of information for them to have. And what we found at the end of that, basically a year of basically cajoling managers and leaders, was to get what we found was there was the folks who actually participated in those conversations saw a significant increase in their buy-in to the DII kind of work that we were doing across the organization. And that's really important because for a lot of organizations, because there's no conversations, because there's no, like, what are these words and terms that we're talking about? Even now we're debating what DEI is, right? And so for National Instruments, it was really just beginning those conversations so people felt like it was comfortable. This is normal. this is a part of who we are. Because our legacy before that was this pretty much old white men organization, right? And if you were a white dude who maybe was straight out of college, this was a perfect place for you to be, right? But if you were a woman, if you were a person of color, if you maybe you're not from the United States, there was some adjusting you had to do to the culture of the organization. And so what these inclusive conversations were an attempt to do is to say, hey, it's okay to have these conversations. And here's a way to have the conversations that can be really productive and lead us in a particular direction. But after that, we actually purchased a program. It was at the time it was called Globe Smart. I think now it's called Aspirian, but they've changed the name. But basically, it's a tool that you use to help understand what your cultural kind of approach may be to certain issues and how it may be similar or different than someone who maybe is from China or someone from Costa Rica or from Germany. And it was basically a database of information based on how you responded to certain questions in several different areas to one, understand kind of your communication style and how you kind of negotiated things and how you dealt with problems and how you provided feedback. And then see how that compares to maybe your team or how it may compare to others in the organization. But we use that as a tool to help people, again, continue their work to deepen their understanding of how they are and, of course, how others may be. But the thing I was actually most proud of was a employee branding program. Really, what that was really focusing on is using inclusive design as to help us as a model to help us develop a program that actually failed 3 times before my joining the organization. And we used the inclusive design. So we were looking at people who are typically have the loudest voices, your executives, your shareholders, and really starting theoretically at the grassroots of the organization, the people who are considered at the bound, who oftentimes are the last ones we talk to, and really hear their voices about what their experiences were as an employee, but also what they aspired for the organization to look like. And so having that information really helped us develop a really strong and robust employee branding where people across the organization felt like what they saw themselves in. And that was really important for us to be very successful, not just for the internal dynamics and culture of the organization, but also as we were trying to recruit new folks to the organization. And so that was really, really critical in the work we're doing. And those are kind of 3 areas that we focused on as far as DEI was concerned.
A lot of great work went into that. I know one of the issues you're very passionate about with the rise of white supremacy has seen institutions like Columbia University facing severe fines and reputational damage. Could you discuss the wider impact this has had on workforce morale and productivity and how organizations can counteract such dangerous ideologies?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big challenges, I'm here in Texas, and not too long ago, our state government came in and said, "Hey, DEI is a no-no," and so you had entire teams and offices fired. On the federal level, we've seen over the last couple of months where entire DEI programs have been eliminated. Where you go on web pages, information about Black women, people of color of different backgrounds being taken off the web page. Particularly when it comes to Columbia, for folks who don't know, they lost $400 million. Now, let's be clear. Some of the concern was about some of the anti-Semitism that was not being dealt with, I think, effectively, that many people at Columbia have recognized. But the consequences are the $400 million that they lost, and not just at Columbia, but also at John Hopkins University, there was $800 million. That is well beyond anything we've ever seen. I mean, you think about the racism and sexism that was embedded in a lot of our institutions across the history of this country. None of them have experienced the kind of fines this is experienced. And so it's not about whether they should be held accountable for the work that they did not do around anti-Semitism. It's the disproportionate consequences they're experiencing. And what we're talking about is a very large portion of their budget being eliminated for research in areas that impact all of us, whether it be cancer research, work that we're doing, it's to save lives of people in other countries. Columbia, John Hopkins are centers for making dramatic changes across this globe. And so when you're penalizing them for something that maybe they didn't do in one space, but having impact on people's jobs and livelihood, it just creates a space of hostility, a culture where it says people don't feel like they belong, and unwillingness to really speak their voices and really speak to their First Amendment rights to speak about what's important to them. And so I think it's had a really strong negative impact. And people are still trying to figure out what their next step is going to be at this point.
And just like we've been talking, the consistent theme, dollars, right? That's a lot of money, 800 million. I didn't even know about the John Hopkins University. So again, thank you for your feedback and your expertise, sharing your expertise. Last but not least, Jeremy York. And please, for the other guests, please feel free to put in your questions. We are allotting time for Q&A as well. So Jeremy, as an HR strategy consultant who specializes in fostering inclusivity, could you talk in detail about the key strategies you promote to businesses to increase inclusiveness and the subsequent benefits of doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for having me. And when I started our firm back in 2013, I started it with this whole idea of a people first approach. And that is something that's been very important to me because I've seen as we've grown, kind of grown up coming through the ranks of different jobs that I've held, different companies that I've worked at, that managers and leadership had a tendency to be really focused on the tasks or the work that needed to be done and not necessarily the people who actually do the work, right? And we can't get the work done without those folks. So our approach to really thinking about inclusivity in the way that we consult with our clients really integrates inclusivity as a fundamental business driver rather than some type of siloed initiative. It's more than just something we're going to do, right? It's a business strategy. And so we typically try to partner with organizations to develop strategies that both reflect and advance, their unique culture, who they are, their people, while also embedding inclusive practices into, every talent touch point. And our method kind of begins with this comprehensive assessment of the current state of the organization, looking at things like their systems, their policies, the lived experiences of their people across diverse identities and their backgrounds, which are really, really important, right? Because we need to understand who the organization really is and not just mission, vision, values, but the people who actually make it go. So we look at trying to create these, I don't know, these tailored solutions and address, some of these, immediate gaps, both short and long term of this cultural transformation, right, of what they need to be paying attention to. And I think what really makes us a little different in the way that we look at this is that our approach is really a commitment to connecting inclusive practices with people to measure business outcomes. And again, I like what Michael said, what Dr. Prince had said. It all comes down to the dollars, right? So we have to help people understand what this connectivity is between, inclusivity and the dollars, because that will help us ensure that, we get leadership buy-in and also make sure that it's sustainable as we move forward of looking at how we implement inclusive practices. I personally believe, and our approach again is that, inclusive organizations don't just accommodate the differences that exist between people. They actually leverage those diverse perspectives to drive, things like innovation, to drive things like market relevance, to really help them advance that dollar. And so our work a lot of time is focused on building both structural inclusion through policy and process redesign, and on top of that, the behavioral inclusion through things like leadership development and cultural types of interventions. So we really look at it as taking that people first approach and saying, we really need to focus on the people and understand where we're at with them and integrate them into our business strategies.
So are there specific industries that you focus on in your consulting practice, Jeremy?
Necessarily specific industries. I think it has a lot to do with specific kinds of clients or specific kinds of cultures of organizations, right? Doing this work, we have to understand that the organization has to be ready and prepared and want to do this kind of work in the organization. We've all been there. We've all been around those organizations that could care less about this kind of work. All they're cared about is getting the product made, getting the service done. Don't even care about the people that they have working for them. So we try to look for organizations that really understand and value the importance of that human capital, those individual employees that are working for them, and really do want to create a place where they can excel, grow, and develop. Those are the types of organizations we find that are most successful in implementing inclusive strategies, workplace strategies, as opposed to those who are being forced into it or those who feel like that someone's making them do something they don't want to do.
And what are some of the most effective metrics of success in terms of that you've come across in terms of your practice of giving it back to the leadership? How do they know that the strategies that are being implemented are successful? How do you measure that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Karla. And I think that's a challenge that every person who works in this, in this field, who deals with diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and access. It's like, how do we measure the actual work that we do? Because so much of it is, it's not necessarily tangible kinds of things. And so we have to look at ways that we can measure, this kind of work to show that it really does have an impact on the organization. So, first we look at what we would consider to be things like representation metrics. And that is really looking at and examining the demographic distribution of people across all levels, all functions, high visibility kinds of assignments and positions, and going beyond just basic headcount and saying, oh, well, we have this many diverse people or this. We want to say that we actually have folks in meaningful positions in the organization, right? We also look at how we analyze, promotion velocity, retention patterns, and also we talked about it, pay equity, right? And ensure that we have meaningful advancement opportunities for people in the organization. Secondly, I think we look at what we would consider or call experience metrics. And these are things like data that we would get by using like inclusion specific surveys or focus groups to assess, belonging patterns, or to assess how people feel about the organization across different types of identities, right? And so we would focus on things like, do they feel like they have psychological safety, and what are those indicators? We can measure that, whether employees feel they can bring their authentic selves to work, et cetera. And this is probably one of the harder ones to measure, because we know that a lot of times with leaders, they want more concrete data like numbers, percents, all of this. And we're talking about people's experience, which is just as valuable and which is just as valid as those percents or those numbers, right? So those are those experience metrics. Then we would look at things like behavior metrics. And what that really means is, how is the organization adopting inclusive practices, not only by the employees and teams, but also by leadership. And so this kind of includes things like tracking, individual inclusion initiatives, whatever that might be, measuring sponsorship relationships of, whether that's mentorship or helping people, sponsoring folks to mentor them and to advance in the organization, looking at, here's one thing that a lot of people don't pay attention to, which is meeting dynamics, right? How much time or speaking time are given to different kinds of people in the meetings that we're in? And then what do those contribution patterns look like? So those kind of align with those behavioral type metrics that we talk about. And last but not least, we would probably say, we want to look at business outcome metrics, right? And that's what most leaders want to see, right? But we need to paint the whole picture for them, obviously. And so we've got to connect all the work that we're doing, our inclusion initiatives, to organizational performance indicators, like things like innovation output. What does that look like? Customer satisfaction across diverse segments, decision quality assessments on how people feel, their ability to be able to make decisions and be supported. Also, just looking at how customers, how we're growing our customer base, because that has a huge impact on the organization. If, does the organization look like its customers, and does it look like our communities, and measuring some of those things as it relates to satisfaction. So I think when you look at those four kinds of factors and you show that there's some type of inclusive convergence across all of those measures, it can really help an organization identify and understand, is what we're doing equitable? Do we have, strong advancement patterns that represent all types of people? Do we have consistent belonging experiences across all identity groups? And is that yes, or is it no? And if it's no, why? What does that look like? Do we have widespread adoption inclusive behaviors, and those types of things. And so that's really what we try to look at when we're working with these organizations and implementing, inclusion initiatives. But I think more than anything, the most meaningful measure, Karla, really is sustainability. And, if we can't sustain what we're doing and how we put that into place, then it's not going to be successful. So we really have to look at sustainability as a measure as well.
No, excellent point, Jeremy. And what comes up for me, I had a colleague that was years ago the DE&I person for Wawa, which is a retail store, and their employee resource group was, to your point, why we want people to belong, why we want people to bring their whole self to the organization. The ERG, the Latino ERG for Wawa, had a suggestion. They knew early on that Wawa was expanding, building 5 additional stores in Florida. And they're like, oh, Latino people love eating outside, right? So if you make attractive seating, if you just make it very welcoming, you'll have a strategic advantage over your competition. So the white male dominated leadership of Wawa would not have known that strategy. But if the Latino ERG did not feel comfortable sharing those experiences, why would that have gone to another level? So that's what comes up for me in terms of real examples that can
Absolutely. And I go back to, it's all about the people, knowing your people, understanding your people, valuing your people, all of the things they bring to the table, which is so important.
No, thank you. And I have another example, because a lot of my experience has been in government, where my mother is from Costa Rica, and she spent her basically her background was a registered nurse supervisor. Now she identifies as a Black woman, Black Latino woman, but by looking at her, you wouldn't know that she spoke another language. Once the patients understood that this was a bilingual person, and when my mother was off, she would come into the health, patients would come in, Latino patients would come into the health center, and they're like, oh, where's Joyce? Oh, she's off, she's out sick. Oh, we'll come back when she's back. Because when people feel comfortable, you can come in for a COVID shot, but then what happens is they feel comfortable with that person they're speaking to, and they're like, you know what? This has been hurting for 2 years. Is there anything that I can do? And they might not speak to another person that way. So that goes to health outcomes. And just last week, I was in New York for a convention, and what came up at a design program was the Bronx Children's Museum was being built, and was white male dominated architects that did not design room for strollers in the Children's Museum in the Bronx. So there's gaps that happen when you don't include people at the table. So I want to, so I would love your feedback on that.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. There's something that we call the voice to value ratio. I don't know if you're familiar with that or if you've heard about it, but it's another way that we kind of measure, inclusive workplace practices. And it really talks about and understanding how important it is, the voices of the people, the different kinds of people that you have. And as you shared, the value that those different voices bring in generating new ideas, having creativity, inspiring innovation. Just like you said with Wawa, like they would never have known that had the Latino ERG not shared some of these things, right? So it's that voice to value ratio that we can really look at too, that encourages organizations to implement and carry out and sustain inclusive workplace practices.
Exactly. So I want to make sure I look in the chat for any questions or any last minute comments from our esteemed panel, but I'll be looking in the chat right now to make sure I'm not missing anything.
If it's okay, I just wanted to follow on something that Jeremy said, which I think is really important, and that is that we not get fixated on the numbers, particularly around representation. I think representation is really important. Representation matters. The story of the Children's Museum, is a perfect example of why representation matters. But I have worked with so many clients hundreds of them where all they are doing is measuring their representation, and they're not measuring how included people feel. So yes, they have X number of women and X number of African Americans and whatever. But then you look at how people are feeling, and I'm thinking about work I've done with a whole bunch of law firms. And in every single one, we found that Black associates were the most disengaged in their work. And the representation number doesn't matter at that point because people are just unhappy. They're not doing, the best job. They're not engaged. They're feeling left out. And I think particularly in this time when there's a bit of a pivot on how we do this work, let's just, put representation over here for now and focus on making sure that everyone feels included.
Thank you, Michael.
Michael,
So-
that's a great point because the representation will grow, right? Like
Yes.
if we create environments where people feel like they're included, they belong, and they see other people like them, and that's valued, their perspectives valued, the representation will begin to grow from all of that. So I love that point.
So just in terms of next steps, right? We're focused on business outcomes. I know one large organization, I have a colleague at Amtrak that said they've disbanded all of their ERGs. So, I mean, if you are a person, employee, a person that's VP level, what should be a tangible next step as we go through this process? That's open to any panel member.
What comes to mind for me is going back to what we've seen in our history as a country. I mean, it was a blessing or a benefit of sorts to be able to have ERGs within your organization. That doesn't stop employees from getting together outside of the organization, right? There was a time that whether it was a church or a nonprofit who provided education around certain issues or advocacy, these are still activities that can happen outside the organization. The plus of having it within the organization is that you got them to put money and time towards these activities. And so I would encourage folks to find that thing that, because maybe in your organization, they literally made this conversation illegal. There's no room for it. There's just no exceptions, and they're coming down on folks. And I say, find the other spaces where you can have these conversations that may not be within your organization, but maybe as part of a nonprofit that's doing some good work in the community. So you can keep your keep things sharp and connected and doing the awesome work that's necessary. Because if they try to drown it out in every aspect of your life, that's one, not possible. And two, it keeps us kind of afraid and alone and isolated. And so I would encourage people, if you're feeling like that's the case, find other spaces where you can have these conversations and do this work and be a part of what's going on.
Yeah.
And find out, just in terms of the focus of metrics, what they care about and how we can tie it to that, right? Because that's what's going to get their attention.
Mm-hmm.
Sandra, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just gonna add that one of the things that we've done is really kind of change the question. So instead of asking ourselves, what can't we do? We ask ourselves, what can we do? And really start from there, because I think it's very limiting to kind of react with this negative, like, okay, well, let's dismantle everything. Like, well, no, let's think about what we actually can keep here and build on that. So I think asking that question has led us to, I think, a realization that some of the things are really core to who we are, and we can justify it from a business perspective, and maybe it's massaging a word here or there, but it doesn't mean that it's no longer valid.
Excellent point. So is there any audience member that wants to come off mute and ask a question? I didn't see anything. Jen, did you see any? Dr. Jen, did you see anything in the chat? I did look.
I did not see any questions in the chat, but the floor is open for anybody that has a comment or a question at this time before we wrap up. Okay, well,
Dr. Jen, thank you.
I just want to follow up with this by saying thank you so much to the panel, to Dr. Kazike Prince, to Karla Hill, to Sabrina Williams, to Michael Bach, to Jeremy York for your very, very thoughtful stories and comments this evening. Before we adjourn, I just want to say that I did drop a couple of things in the chat. We have quite a few panel discussions that are ongoing right now. We have a series on AI and a changing business landscape, what executives need to know. We have another one on leading with inclusion, the imperative for business survival. This is the first part of a two-part series on this topic. So more to come on the next scheduled event. We have another big event in May centered around health equity and health and wellness in the workplace. So you'll see more coming out about that as well. And then I also I dropped in a link to join our Slack channel if you'd like to join that to stay in the know. We post all of our events there. If you're interested in becoming a member, our group is for executive level professionals who are striving to learn, network, and grow. And so if that is you, if you fit that profile, consider going on our website, www.vpcircle.com, clicking on Become a Member and completing that quick application and completing your profile information so that we can add your profile to our member directory. And then just a couple of other things. So this is a little bit of information about VP Circle if this is your first event. We are a networking group. We meet a couple of times a year. We hold virtual networking events so that our leaders can get to know each other. We believe in the power of networking. At our core, we believe that when our executives are connecting with each other, things happen. People learn of opportunities, of partnerships, of opportunities to collaborate. We get together and we form these relationships and we achieve great things. We're committed to creating a community where executives can network with their peers and discover and capitalize on opportunities. We have helped individuals over this last year obtain new roles. We have helped individuals to find partners for new ventures that they're starting, and more and more. We are 800 executives officially, I think today, and growing from some of the world's top companies. This is just a sample of some of the executive leaders in the circle and the companies they represent. You can see that here on this slide. Pretty cool stuff. And we have a lot of facilitators. So another cool thing about us is that the content that we're sharing, most of it is curated and facilitated by VP Circle members. And so you'll see these are all of the facilitators. I think there's 18 of them that have facilitated events for us this year or are going to be facilitating events for us this year. So very cool. Kind of like each one teach one. The strength of the circle is what makes this so powerful, and the background and the experiences that the circle offers. So to learn more about our events, you can go to vpcircle.com and then click on what's on. We do have a networking event coming up on April 8th. We have quite a few new members since the beginning of the quarter, and so we will be holding a networking event on April 8th, and I dropped that information in the chat as well. So consider coming out. It's at 12 noon EST. Grab your lunch and join us and meet some cool folks from some cool companies. And then finally, we have a member directory. We are slowly reaching out to all 800 of our members and trying to get them to get their leader profiles into our directory. So far, we have 400 out of the 800 profiles uploaded in our directory. And so there's an opportunity to use that to aid in your networking by searching for individuals by industry, by job title, by geography, by company name. We have direct phone numbers and emails in our new member directory, again, to aid you in your networking in your continued learning and development. So just a couple of next steps. Consider creating your profile on vpcircle.com so that we can officially add you to our group. Consider joining our Slack channel to stay in the know. We also have a YouTube channel that's pretty easy to search. Consider joining our upcoming networking event on April 8th. And, the more the merrier. The strength of the circle really lies in who's in the circle. So please refer individuals that you think could benefit from these synergies and this collective learning and this collective networking. And that is all I have prepared this evening. Thank you all so much for joining. I hope you found this discussion to be of value, and I hope to see you at the next event. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank
Good
you. Have a great evening.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good
Good
night.
night.